My son's wife changed the locks on my home. I didn't say a word. The next morning, she woke up to find all her belongings. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're watching this, please hit subscribe to her voice and tell me in the comments which part shocked you the most. I stood there, holding my old brass key in my hand, the one I'd used for over 30 years. It had opened that door through birthdays, Christmas mornings, and long quiet nights after my husband passed. But that morning, it didn't turn. It didn't even fit. I tried again, gently, thinking maybe I was just tired or clumsy. But no, it was the lock that had changed. For a moment, I just stared at the door. My door. The wreath I'd hung last fall still dangled there, a little crooked from the wind. Lena's silver car sat in the driveway. The blinds were drawn, the porch light still on from the night before. I pressed my palm against the door, as if somehow it might recognize me and open on its own. But it stayed cold, still, and silent. My heart didn't break all at once. It cracked in small, quiet ways, in the space between one breath and the next, in the soft memory of Ethan, 5 years old, running through that same door with muddy shoes. In the sound of my husband's laughter echoing through those walls years ago. Now, it was just the faint hum of betrayal sitting heavy in my chest. I could hear movement inside, Lena's voice light and sharp, like glass clinking. Then Ethan's, lower, uncertain. They were home. My own son was inside my house, behind a lock I no longer had the key to. I should have knocked. I could have called his name. But something in me told me not to. Not yet, so I sat down on the porch swing, the one my husband built with his own hands. The wood creaked under me, familiar and kind, like an old friend asking if I was all right. I watched a stray leaf drift across the porch floor, caught in the morning light. I thought of how many mornings I'd sat here with coffee, watching the neighborhood come alive. Today, I just sat in silence. Minutes turned to hours. My fingers traced the grooves of the swing's armrest over and over, as if trying to remember what home felt like. Inside, laughter, dishes clinking, the rhythm of life that used to belong to me. I felt invisible, like a ghost haunting the place she once called her own. When Ethan finally stepped out, it wasn't to open the door. He just looked at me, surprised, almost guilty. "Mom," he said softly. Lena thought, but he stopped there. His words fell apart, and so did my last bit of hope that this was some misunderstanding. I nodded slowly. "It's all right," I whispered, even though it wasn't. I stood up, dusted off my skirt, and walked down those steps one last time. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just felt the quiet settle deep in my bones. As I reached the gate, I turned back for one last look. The house stood still, proud and silent. My house, my memories, my name on the deed. They could change the locks, but not the truth. And in that still morning air, I promised myself, I wouldn't fight with anger. I would wait, because sometimes silence is the beginning of something stronger than revenge. I didn't go far that day. After walking around the block a few times, I found myself right back there, sitting on that same porch swing, as if my heart refused to let go. The morning had turned into afternoon, and the sun spilled across the white steps, warming the wood beneath my hands. I sat quietly, not as an intruder, but as someone trying to remember what home used to feel like before it became someone else's possession. The neighborhood was alive as usual. Kids riding bikes, a mail truck humming down the street, a neighbor's dog barking somewhere in the distance. Everything looked the same, yet inside me, everything had shifted. The world still spun, but I was standing still, holding the echo of a life I no longer seemed to belong to. From inside the house, I heard Lena's voice again. Sharp, confident, talking about dinner plans. Then laughter, hers and Ethan's together. It hit me deeper than I expected. It wasn't the laughter itself that hurt, but the ease in it. The sound of my son feeling comfortable behind a door that no longer opened for me. I stared at the porch railing, the chipped white paint that my husband and I had repainted every spring. I could almost see him there, kneeling beside me with that old paintbrush, teasing me about missing a spot. "You're too gentle, Maggie," he used to say, his voice carrying that warm Southern patience. "Sometimes things need a firm hand." He'd wink and brush a little paint on my nose, and we'd laugh until the sun went down. Now that memory brushed across me like wind, soft but cutting. I folded my hands in my lap, fingers trembling slightly. I didn't feel anger, not the way people might expect. I felt something quieter, like grief mixed with realization. This wasn't just about a lock. It was about how easily people can push you aside when they think your presence no longer fits their picture. My phone buzzed once on the table beside me. A message from Nancy. "Did you get home safe?" I looked at those words for a long while before replying, "Not exactly." I didn't explain. I couldn't yet. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and cut grass. I closed my eyes, breathing it in, grounding myself. I wasn't going to storm in or make a scene. That wasn't my way. But I also knew one thing with absolute clarity. This silence they'd given me would not break me. It would sharpen me. As the sun began to lower, I stood up from the swing. The wood creaked one last time beneath me, and it sounded like goodbye. I walked to the sidewalk, my shadow long and soft on the pavement. I took one final look at that house, at the closed door, and whispered under my breath, "You can have the locks, Lena, but you'll never have the roots." Then I turned away, heading toward Nancy's porch light, glowing at the end of the street. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's a seed. It grows quietly, underneath the hurt, until one day it blooms into something powerful. And that night, sitting on Nancy's porch with a cup of lukewarm tea, I felt that seed begin to take root. The next morning, my phone rang just after 7. I didn't have to look at the screen to know who it was. Ethan. For a few seconds, I just stared at it ringing on the table beside my coffee cup. The steam from the cup curled into the air, slow and ghost-like, soft against the morning light. I let it ring twice more before I picked it up. My voice came out calm, almost too calm. "Good morning, honey." There was a pause. A long one. Then his voice came through, low, uneasy. "Mom, hey, about yesterday." He stopped, breathing shallow, searching for the right words. I could hear Lena somewhere behind him, her voice faint but sharp, cutting through the quiet like a whisper that wasn't meant for me. He lowered his tone. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I stood by the kitchen window at Nancy's house, the one that looked out over her yard where sunlight touched the grass with that golden Charleston glow. "You changed the locks, Ethan," I said softly, almost as if I were saying it to myself. "That's not something that just happens." He sighed, heavy and unsure. Lena thought. She thought it would make things simpler. After the confusion. I felt that word settle somewhere deep, bitter, and familiar. Confusion doesn't come with new locks and a mother standing outside her own home. I wanted to ask him when he'd stopped being my son and started being someone else's echo, but I didn't. I just listened to the tremor in his voice, that small, guilty tremor only mothers can hear. "It's temporary," he said after a while. "We just need to figure some things out. I promise we'll talk about it soon." I waited a breath before replying. "All right, Ethan, take your time." My tone was gentle, but my chest felt tight. I knew time had a way of revealing what truth people tried to hide behind soft promises. When the call ended, the kitchen felt suddenly too quiet. I could hear the steady ticking of the clock above the sink, the hum of Nancy's old refrigerator, even the faint rustle of her turning a newspaper page in the other room. She didn't ask me what he said. She just came over, poured a little more coffee into my cup, and gave me a look that said more than words ever could. Later that day, I walked past my old house again. The curtains were open this time, sunlight spilling through the windows I had washed every spring. Inside, I saw Lena moving gracefully from room to room, talking on her phone, smiling as she shifted the furniture, my furniture, around. I felt a quiet ache spread through me. I thought about knocking, about reminding her whose name was still printed on that deed, folded neatly in my desk drawer. But instead, I whispered to myself, let her decorate her illusion. As I turned away, the wind carried Ethan's laughter from somewhere inside. It stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't the sound of joy that hurt me. It was how far away it felt, like a sound from another life I once knew. That night, I opened my old journal and wrote just one sentence. My son has forgotten the sound of my key turning in his door. Then, after a moment, I added one more line, slower this time, the words almost trembling on the page. But he will remember. That night I didn't sleep at all. The house felt too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath. Every sound, the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the soft wind brushing the curtains, felt louder than it should. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of tea I had made hours ago, my hands trembling around the handle. My son's words replayed in my mind. It's just easier for us this way, Mom. Easier. As if my existence had become a burden they needed to simplify. The next morning I forced myself to step outside. The autumn air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of burning leaves from somewhere down the block. I pulled my shawl tighter and saw Nancy, my neighbor, sweeping her porch. She looked up and waved, but when she saw my face, her smile faltered. She came over immediately, wiping her hands on her apron. "Margaret, honey, you look pale. Are you all right?" she asked softly. I tried to nod, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't want to say it out loud, that my own daughter-in-law had changed the locks on me, that my son had stood by and let it happen. But the tears gave me away. Nancy guided me to sit on the porch bench, her hand warm over mine. "You don't deserve this," she whispered. "You've given that boy everything." I knew she was right. I had worked 2 jobs to put Ethan through college after his father passed away. I had missed birthdays, vacations, moments, all to make sure he never lacked a thing. And now, the boy who once held my hand crossing the street had become a man who looked right through me. Later that day, I decided to call him again. Maybe he'd come to his senses, maybe Lena had gone too far. But when he answered, his voice was cold, distant. "Mom, Lena's not comfortable with you just dropping by. You need to call first." I could barely breathe. "Ethan," I said quietly, "this is my home." There was a pause, then his reply came, calm but final. "It's our home now, Mom. Things have changed." I hung up before he could say another word. My fingers felt numb, my chest hollow. I sat there for hours, staring at the photo of us on the mantel, Ethan as a little boy, his arm around my neck, his smile wide and trusting. That picture felt like a lie now, a memory from a world that didn't exist anymore. When night fell again, the loneliness sank deeper. I looked around the empty house and whispered to myself, if they've shut me out, I'll find my way back in. Because something inside me, something fierce and quiet, had woken up. And I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of what I had to do next. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a heavy head. The kind of morning where silence feels cruel, and the house itself seems to sigh. I brewed a pot of coffee, though I barely drank it. The bitter smell filled the kitchen, wrapping around me like a fog of old memories. Ethan's laughter used to echo in this room. His sneakers used to be by that door. Now all that remained was an ache too deep to put into words. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my mug, when a knock broke the stillness. It was Nancy again, holding a small envelope. "This came to my mailbox by mistake," she said. "It's from the property office." I thanked her, though my heart began to pound. I tore it open, and there it was. A notice, cold and sharp. Transfer of property deed. My name wasn't on it anymore. Only Ethan and Lena's. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The room spun, and I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. They hadn't just changed the locks. They had taken my home, legally. Every corner of that house, every memory, every wall painted by my hands. Gone in a single sheet of paper. Nancy saw my face turn pale. "Margaret, what's wrong?" she whispered. I showed her the document with trembling hands. She gasped. "Oh, honey, you can't let them get away with this." That afternoon, she drove me downtown, straight to her cousin's office, Tom Riley, a local lawyer. I didn't know what to expect, but the moment I walked in, his calm voice and steady eyes gave me a small sense of hope. He listened carefully as I told him everything: the lock change, Ethan's words, the deed. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Margaret, this is wrong on so many levels. But don't you worry, we'll get to the bottom of it." He asked to see all my documents, the mortgage papers, and any proof of ownership. I told him everything was still in the drawer by my old bedroom, the one I no longer had a key to. That realization hit me like a slap. I couldn't even enter my own home to retrieve my papers. Tom gave a small nod. "Then we'll start by requesting access. Legally, they can't bar you from retrieving your belongings or documents." His tone was firm, almost protective. For the first time in days, I felt seen, not as an aging mother to be dismissed, but as a person wronged. When I left his office, the evening sky was streaked with orange and gold. The wind carried the scent of coming rain. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Something had shifted inside me. A quiet strength, a determination I didn't know I still had. They thought they could erase me from my own life. But they were about to find out. I wasn't done yet. 2 days later, Tom called me early in the morning. His voice was steady but urgent. "Margaret, I've filed the request. You have every legal right to access your property and retrieve your personal documents. I'll meet you there this afternoon." For a moment, my heart fluttered with both fear and relief. I was going back to the house, my house, though now it felt like walking into foreign land. I put on my blue coat, the one Ethan had bought me years ago for Mother's Day. It still smelled faintly of lavender. As I buttoned it, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Tired eyes, silver hair pulled back, but something new behind my face. Strength. Quiet, steady strength. Nancy insisted on coming with me. "You're not going alone, not after what they did," she said, her voice firm. So she rode beside me in her little beige car, humming softly as if the sound might hold me together. The neighborhood looked the same, tidy lawns, familiar mailboxes, yet every turn made my chest tighter. When we finally stopped in front of my old home, my breath caught. The curtains were drawn now, the flowers I used to tend had withered, and the welcome mat, the one that said, "Home Sweet Home," was gone. My fingers shook as I stepped out of the car. Lena's SUV was parked in the driveway. She was home. Tom arrived a few minutes later, his briefcase in hand. He gave me a reassuring nod before walking up to the door and knocking firmly. It took a while, but then the door opened. Lena stood there, wearing that same cold smile she always wore when she thought she was in control. "Oh," she said, her tone sharp. "Didn't expect visitors." Tom spoke before I could. "Mrs. Cole has a legal right to retrieve her belongings and personal documents." "You've been notified." Lena crossed her arms. "Everything she owns has already been boxed up. I'll have Ethan bring it out." She turned to call him, but I stepped forward. "No," I said quietly, my voice trembling yet strong. "I want to see for myself." For a second her expression faltered, just a flicker of discomfort, but she stepped aside. My heart pounded as I crossed the threshold. The air inside smelled different now. Lemon cleaner and something faintly metallic. My photographs were gone from the walls. The old rug I'd hand-woven years ago had been replaced. Every trace of me had been wiped away. Tom and I went straight to the study. The drawers were empty, except for a few old bills and magazines. My important papers were missing. When I turned to ask Lena, she shrugged. "I don't know where your files went." "Maybe you misplaced them before." Her words sliced through me like ice. Tom shot her a cold look and wrote something in his notes. As we walked out, I felt the ache of loss press heavy against my chest, but underneath it, a spark was growing. They thought they could erase me so easily, but what they didn't know was that I still had something far more powerful than papers or keys. I had truth, and I was ready to fight for it. A few days later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Ethan. His voice was cautious, hesitant, almost like he was testing the waters. "Mom, Lena and I were thinking, maybe you could come for dinner tonight." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Dinner. In their house. My chest tightened at the thought. I wanted to say no. I wanted to let anger and hurt guide me, but something inside whispered, "Watch. Listen. Learn." That evening, I dressed carefully in a soft cream sweater and navy skirt, the kind of outfit that felt like me, calm, composed, dignified. I arrived at the house when the sun was low, spilling warm light across the driveway. Lena opened the door immediately, smiling, her tone sweet but a little too practiced. "Margaret, come in. We're so glad you're here." I stepped over the threshold, letting my eyes take in the changes. The furniture had been rearranged. Flowers in mismatched vases replaced the ones I used to arrange. The smell of something spicy, unfamiliar, lingered in the air. It was their world now. But I reminded myself I was still me, still grounded, still patient. Ethan hovered nearby, a little tense, like he wasn't sure where I fit in anymore. I greeted him quietly, and he returned it with a nod, avoiding my eyes for just a moment too long. We sat at the table. Lena served the first course with exaggerated grace, placing each plate carefully. I observed quietly, noticing the little details, the way she chose every dish, arranged every utensil. It was all controlled, precise, polished. Throughout the meal, Lena spoke constantly, filling every pause with stories, updates, and achievements. Ethan laughed at her jokes, but rarely added anything himself. I stayed quiet, listening, letting my presence linger like a shadow in the corner. Not intrusive, not angry, just undeniably there. And in that quiet, I noticed it. A slip in her voice when she thought I wasn't paying attention. A slight tremor as she gestured to the chairs. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but I saw it. I realized then that she thought she had the upper hand, that she'd won. But she hadn't seen me. She hadn't truly measured the depth of what a mother protects, what a woman reclaims in silence. By the end of the meal, I had said little, yet I felt the balance subtly shift. She watched me as I left, her eyes searching for something. Maybe confrontation, maybe defeat. But I just smiled gently. "Thank you for dinner. I said, my voice soft but steady. As I walked back to Nancy's car, the evening air felt cool and comforting against my cheeks. I realized then that the quiet power of patience, of observation, of waiting, was already working. They had their house. I had my mind, my strength, and most importantly, my plan. Sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones no one sees coming. And for the first time since the locks were changed, I felt a quiet sense of anticipation. A few nights later, Ethan called me again. This time, it wasn't about dinner or apologies. It was about Lena. I could hear her voice faintly in the background, but this time it was different. There was a slight edge to it, a slip of honesty she didn't intend for me to hear. "We're just redoing the whole house," she said casually. "It's, my house now." My fork paused midair as I listened. Those words hung in the silence between us, heavier than any argument could have been. My house, my house. Every picture I'd hung, every corner I'd loved, every wall I'd painted with Ethan's laughter echoing around me. She was trying to erase it all. She wasn't just moving in. She was rewriting history. Ethan didn't notice the way my hand trembled as I set my fork down. I let him speak, let him explain that it was for the better, that she only wanted things organized. But I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just listened. And as I listened, a quiet, steady anger began to grow inside me. Not the loud, reckless kind that burns everything in its path, but the kind that sharpens focus, the kind that reminds you who you are and what you will not give away. I thought about all the nights I'd spent making this house a home, the wallpaper Ethan had picked with a sticky little hand, the floors we'd polished together, the garden we'd nurtured through every season. It was still mine, no matter what locks she had changed or what words she whispered into my son's ears. That night, when the call ended, I sat alone in Nancy's living room, the shadows of the lamp stretching across the walls. I realized something important. Lena didn't understand the strength of quiet resolve. She believed control meant possession, that changing locks or moving furniture could erase history. But she hadn't yet seen the way a mother's memory, a mother's dignity, could shape the future quietly, elegantly, like water-carving stone. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. For the first time since the locks were changed, I felt a small measure of calm. I had proof, I had patience, and I had the law on my side. More than that, I had something Lena could never touch. The truth of what this house had meant, and still meant to me. And in that stillness, I began to imagine the steps ahead, subtle, deliberate, unshakable. She thought she had won, but she had no idea the quiet storm that was already taking shape, one careful decision at a time. Sometimes the most profound confessions don't come from the mouth. They come from presence, patience, and the slow gathering of undeniable strength. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in my guest bedroom at Nancy's house, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the street outside. Every creak, every rustle, sounded sharper in the dark, echoing through me like reminders of what had been taken. The house I had called home for decades, the rooms that held my laughter and grief alike, had become someone else's playground. And yet, in the quiet, I felt something stirring, a determination I hadn't realized I still carried. I thought about the photograph of Ethan as a little boy, his arm thrown around my neck, his grin wide and unguarded. How could someone take that memory and turn it into a moment they owned? The injustice of it burned quietly, but beneath the ache I felt clarity. Lena had underestimated me. She didn't know how deeply roots run, how they anchor you, unseen but unshakable. I rose from the bed and walked to the window. The street was bathed in the soft silver of moonlight. Leaves rustled, and the distant bark of a dog carried across the empty yards. My mind ran through every detail of the house. The brass doorknob I'd polished every week. The mantel where my husband's watch always sat. The kitchen sink where I had washed endless dishes with tired, loving hands. All of it still belonged to me, at least in memory, and memory is stronger than locks. I poured myself a glass of water, letting the cool liquid run down my throat and steady the trembling in my hands. Sometimes the quietest nights bring the sharpest revelations. I realized I didn't need to force a confrontation. I didn't need anger to drive me. What I needed was patience, observation, and planning. Lena thought she had the upper hand. She thought she could erase me quietly without resistance. But as I sat back down and traced the rim of my glass, I began to see the path forward. I would retrieve what was mine, piece by piece, with calm determination. I would not yell, I would not shout. I would simply step forward, one measured move at a time, until the truth of ownership, respect, and dignity revealed itself clearly. The moonlight shifted, and the night felt almost tender. For the first time in days, I felt a small sense of peace mixed with resolve. I whispered into the darkness, "They think this is the end, but it's only the beginning." And in that quiet, sleepless night, I promised myself something I had forgotten in the chaos of betrayal. Sometimes the strongest victories are built in silence, and they bloom slowly, deliberately, like the roots of an old, unshakable tree. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in days. The weight of betrayal was still there, sitting quietly in my chest, but it no longer paralyzed me. I dressed carefully, choosing my favorite cardigan, soft gray, with sleeves worn just enough to feel familiar against my skin. It was a small comfort, a reminder that some things still belonged to me, that some parts of my life no one could take away. Nancy insisted on driving me again. "You're not going in there alone," she said, her tone firm but caring. I nodded, grateful for her presence. Her quiet support was grounding, like the steady hum of the earth beneath my feet. As we approached the house, I noticed the way the morning light hit the white siding, the way shadows played across the driveway. Everything looked ordinary, but I knew better. The ordinary could be deceiving. Tom met us at the gate, his briefcase in hand. His calm presence gave me courage. We had a plan, the first legal steps to reclaim what was mine. Lena answered the door herself this time, her smile practiced, almost rehearsed. "Margaret, you're here again," she said, her tone polite but laced with something sharper underneath. I stepped forward slowly, letting my presence fill the space. "I need to retrieve some personal documents," I said quietly, deliberately. "Tom has everything prepared." Her smile faltered for the briefest moment. I noticed it, the flicker of doubt that passed across her face. She tried to regain control, stepping back as if to assert dominance. But Tom's voice was firm, precise. "Mrs. Cole has a right to her belongings. You've been served notice. This is not optional." Lena's hands tightened slightly around the doorframe. I didn't speak. I didn't move fast. I let her watch me. Every step I took into the house was measured, calm, deliberate. My eyes swept the rooms as if cataloging everything I had lost, everything I would reclaim. We started with the study. Drawers were opened, cabinets emptied. My heart thudded quietly as Tom retrieved the papers I needed. Each document was a piece of my life, a shard of the history they had tried to erase. I held them close, feeling their weight in my hands, and for the first time in days, I felt grounded, powerful, like I had a tether back to the world they thought they had taken. As I walked through the house, Lena watched me, silent now. Her confidence had waned. I could see it in the way she shifted from foot to foot, in the slight twitch of her jaw. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Presence, calm, and truth were already doing their work. By the time we left, the sun was higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the driveway. I held my papers close, my shoulders steady. Something inside had shifted completely. They thought this was the end. But in quiet determination and measured action, I had already begun taking my life back. By late afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Holding my documents, walking out of the house with Tom by my side, I realized just how much power could be held in calm persistence. Lena had watched every move, every careful step I took, and I could sense the tension behind her smile. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence said everything. Nancy was waiting in her driveway, and the sight of her warm smile made my chest ache in a comforting way. She handed me a cup of tea, and for a moment we simply stood there, the soft clink of the cup against her saucer, the only sound between us. I didn't feel triumphant in a loud sense. It was quieter than that. It was the satisfaction of claiming something that had been denied, of reminding myself that even in betrayal, dignity and patience have their place. That evening, I placed my papers carefully on the small writing desk in Nancy's study. The lamp cast a golden glow over the room, soft and gentle. I allowed myself a quiet sigh, letting tension slip from my shoulders. For the first time since the locks were changed, I felt the stirrings of hope, of clarity. I had reclaimed the tangible pieces of my life, the memories, the moments, the heart of the home. Those were untouchable, and I carried them safely with me. Ethan called later that night. His voice was quiet, measured, carrying a weight I hadn't heard before. "Mom, I saw what Tom did today. I didn't realize how much this meant to you." I let his words hang between us for a moment, breathing slowly before answering. "It matters, Ethan. Some things matter more than words. Some things can't be ignored." He didn't respond immediately, and that silence was heavy but necessary. It reminded him, I hoped, that choices have consequences, that respect cannot be bypassed by impatience or pride. Sometimes the quiet lessons are the ones that leave the deepest mark. Later, as I sat in Nancy's living room, I realized that this small victory was only the beginning. They had tried to erase me with a lock, with a deed, with words and subtle power plays. But they hadn't accounted for patience, for observation, for the quiet accumulation of resolve. And so I let the night settle over me, the weight of the day softening into something comforting. I knew what I had to do next, and it would be done not with anger, but with precision, with grace, and with the inevitability of truth. Even small victories carry immense power when they are earned quietly and deliberately. And tonight, for the first time in a long while, I felt that power quietly hum beneath my skin. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at Nancy's house, addressed to me in familiar handwriting. I recognized the neat scrawl immediately. It was from a law firm, one I hadn't contacted but whose reputation was well known in Charleston. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a single sheet of legal notice, but beneath the formal words, there was something else. A subtle acknowledgement of wrongdoing, a recognition that my rights had been violated. I sat at Nancy's kitchen table, the envelope still warm from the mail slot, and let the words sink in. Lena had crossed a line, Ethan had allowed it, but now the law was on my side. My pulse slowed and a sense of quiet satisfaction filled me. This was more than paperwork. It was validation. It was proof that patience, observation, and careful action could reclaim what had been stolen. I looked up at Nancy, who was busying herself with her tea, but I could see her eyes on me, full of understanding and support. "It's all coming back to you," she said softly, almost reverently. And she was right. Every memory, every corner of the house, every artifact of my life was still mine in essence. The locks, the deeds, the superficial control. They couldn't erase what was built with decades of love, care, and patience. I read the letter again, slowly, savoring each line. It mentioned access, property rights, and the legal obligation for Ethan and Lena to respect my ownership. But more than that, it hinted at consequences, a quiet warning that would ripple through the household if ignored. I allowed myself a small private smile. There was no shouting, no confrontation, no dramatic gestures. Just the weight of truth settling into place. Later that evening, I placed the letter in my purse and went for a walk along the familiar streets of Charleston. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from a neighbor's garden. The distant hum of traffic, the occasional laughter of children, even the soft rustle of the wind through the oaks, all felt comforting. I realized something then. Revenge, if you can call it that, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, like law and truth quietly asserting themselves, letting those who overreach stumble on the consequences of their own choices. By the time I returned to Nancy's, the sky was fading into shades of purple and gold. I sat quietly in the living room, letting the events of the week settle. Lena's confidence, once so apparent, would begin to erode. Ethan would have to reckon with the fact that his mother was neither fragile nor forgetful. And I, in my quiet corner, was ready. I had the law, I had patience, and I had a plan, calm, deliberate, and unavoidable. For the first time since the locks were changed, I felt a sense of balance returning, a slow, deliberate reassurance that what was taken could and would be returned, not through anger, but through the undeniable power of truth. Over the next few days, I made a habit of observing from a distance, not in a dramatic, intrusive way, but quietly, like a shadow in the corner of a room. Nancy would accompany me on short walks past the house, giving me an excuse to glance through the windows, notice the small details that spoke louder than words. The way Lena arranged the furniture, how Ethan seemed hesitant, almost withdrawn, in his own home. Each movement, each expression, told a story I was beginning to understand more clearly. I noticed little things I had never paid attention to before. The way Lena would place her coffee cup on the wrong coaster, or how Ethan would glance at the empty spaces where my photographs once hung. There were moments of hesitation, tiny cracks in the facade they had carefully constructed, and those cracks, subtle as they were, gave me hope. I spent hours in quiet reflection, walking the streets around the neighborhood, retracing the paths Ethan and I had taken on long summer evenings. The smells of freshly baked bread from the corner bakery, the laughter of children playing in the yards, even the creak of an old swing set, all of it reminded me of a home built on more than walls and locks. It reminded me of roots, of memories, of a presence that could not be erased. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the driveway, I saw Lena adjusting the curtains in the living room. She paused, frowning slightly, as if she sensed someone watching. I smiled softly, stepping back into the shadow of the oak tree across the street. She had no idea. She still believed control was about keys and deeds. She hadn't yet realized that the quiet observer, the patient presence, can wield a far more enduring power. That night, I sat at Nancy's kitchen table sipping tea and made a quiet note in my journal. Patience, watch, wait. Every step they take reveals their own weakness. I allowed myself a small, steady breath. The seeds of quiet, poetic justice were being planted, and I was tending them with care. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I felt the shift in the air. They thought they had erased me, but the truth, like the slow growth of roots beneath the soil, was already reclaiming its place, and I would let it unfold naturally, with the deliberate grace of someone who had waited decades to see what was rightfully theirs restored. A few days later, an unexpected knock came at Nancy's door. I opened it to find Tom standing there holding a folder. His expression was serious, but calm, the kind of look that always made me feel a little braver. "I've been speaking with a neighbor on the block," he said quietly. "Turns out someone has noticed inconsistencies in what's been happening at your house." I raised an eyebrow, curious despite myself. "What do you mean?" Tom handed me the folder. Inside were notes, observations, and even photographs, taken discreetly, of course, showing small details that revealed Lena's carelessness. Missing receipts, misplaced objects, subtle signs that she had been moving or taking things without permission. It wasn't explosive evidence, but it was enough to build a pattern, to quietly prove what had been happening behind closed doors. My heart lifted, quietly, as I flipped through the papers. An ally had emerged, someone outside the household who could corroborate what I had suspected all along. It was subtle, yes, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but it gave me something invaluable: leverage. The kind of leverage that didn't need shouting or confrontation. Tom's voice brought me back. "This doesn't change everything overnight, Margaret. But it strengthens your position. We can proceed carefully, deliberately, and the law will be on your side." I nodded, feeling a small smile tug at my lips. It was as if a gentle wind had shifted the tension in the room. They had thought they could isolate me, make me powerless. But outside eyes, quiet observation, patience, these things could tip the balance in my favor. That evening, I walked past my old house with Nancy at my side. The windows reflected the fading sunlight, Lena moving inside, unaware that her every action was quietly noted. I didn't feel anger or desperation. I felt something stronger, clarity. Every move they made, every careless gesture, only reinforced what I already knew. The home, the memories, the life I had built, could not be erased by a lock or a deed. Back at Nancy's, I wrote in my journal, "Allies come in quiet ways. They don't shout. They simply strengthen the truth." The words felt like armor around my chest. I was ready. The pieces were falling into place, and the quiet, poetic justice I had imagined was beginning to take shape. I realized then that revenge didn't need to be loud to be effective. Sometimes it needed patience, subtlety, and the careful alignment of truth. And in that subtle unfolding, I felt my power returning, piece by piece, step by deliberate step. A week later, I returned to the house, but this time I didn't go as a visitor. I went with purpose. Tom had arranged a meeting, a formal, calm discussion that would make my presence undeniable. Lena opened the door, her practiced smile still in place, but there was something different in her eyes this time. A flicker of unease, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "Margaret," she said, her voice carefully polite. "What brings you here today?" I stepped forward slowly, letting my posture and calm presence fill the doorway. "I'm here to retrieve the remaining documents and personal items that belong to me," I said quietly, deliberately. My voice was soft, yet carried a firmness that demanded attention. Ethan appeared behind her, hesitant, caught between his wife's control and the reality he was beginning to sense. "Mom, maybe we can talk about this later," he offered, his tone uncertain. "No," I replied, shaking my head gently. "Now is the time." Tom was by my side, quietly observing, ready to step in if needed. Lena's hands twitched slightly at her sides, betraying her composure. I could see her calculating, wondering how far she could push before the law and truth intervened. I didn't move hastily. I didn't shout. I let the silence speak. We walked through the living room together. I noticed the small inconsistencies Tom had documented, items out of place, subtle signs of hurried rearrangements, little mistakes that betrayed control for insecurity. Lena caught my gaze briefly, but I held it with quiet calm. She could see that I was patient, steady, and prepared. As we reached the study, I began collecting what was mine. Papers, photographs, small keepsakes, each item placed carefully in a bag I had brought. Lena's lips pressed together, her posture rigid. Ethan remained silent, watching as his mother, steady and composed, reclaimed pieces of the life they thought they could erase. When I finished, I turned to leave. Lena's voice, quieter now, broke the tension. You really plan to take everything back?" I smiled softly, a gentle, almost sad smile. "Not everything," I said. "Just what was always mine." As I stepped outside, the sunlight warmed my face, and I felt a subtle shift inside. This confrontation hadn't been loud or dramatic, but it had been decisive. The first step of quiet justice had been taken, and the imbalance they tried to impose was already beginning to correct itself. Nancy was waiting at the curb, her hand on mine. I felt a wave of calm sweep over me. Sometimes, the first confrontation isn't about victory. It's about presence, patience, and proving quietly that you cannot be erased. And today, I had done exactly that. After that first confrontation, I realized that the most effective way to regain control was not through anger or loud words. It had to be subtle, almost invisible, like the quiet turning of a tide. I began leaving small reminders of my presence. A photograph here, a personal note there, things that spoke of history, love, and memory without needing explanation. Nancy and I walked past the house in the evenings, observing without being seen. I noted every careless detail Lena left behind. A misplaced dish, a crooked frame, the faint scent of cleaning products trying too hard to erase familiarity. I would smile to myself quietly. Every slip, every oversight, was a thread I could gently tug at to remind them that control was never absolute. One afternoon, I sent a handwritten note to Ethan, just a few lines, warm and calm, reminding him of the importance of family and memory. I didn't accuse, I didn't scold. I simply reminded him that some things are worth protecting. He read it, I was sure, and it lingered in his mind. A quiet echo of truth he couldn't ignore. At home with Nancy, I carefully catalogued each piece I had reclaimed from the study. Old letters, photographs, and papers became symbols of quiet resilience. I began to plan the next steps with Tom, the legal avenues. Yes, but also the personal assertion of presence, of dignity that Lena could not touch. Each visit, each observation, each subtle act of reclamation was a stitch in a larger tapestry. I wasn't moving furniture or raising my voice. I was building a quiet but undeniable narrative, one that spoke of ownership, memory, and patience. I felt satisfaction in these small victories, knowing that each one was weakening their sense of total control. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on Nancy's porch with a cup of tea. Letting the warm liquid soothe my hands, I reflected on how power often lies not in aggression, but in patience, precision, and quiet consistency. Lena believed she had erased me with a lock and a deed, but she had underestimated the force of a steady heart, the persistence of dignity, and the quiet effectiveness of observation. I whispered softly to the fading light. They will see in time that control is never absolute, and that the truth cannot be erased. There was no malice in my words, only calm, deliberate resolve. The path forward was clear, the stakes understood, and the quiet plan taking shape, piece by deliberate piece. By midweek, the small threads I had been observing and collecting began to weave into something tangible. Tom had gathered additional documentation, corroborating my earlier findings, receipts, notes, even timestamps showing Lena's repeated disregard for the proper handling of my belongings. Each piece was small on its own, almost invisible, but together they formed a pattern that could not be ignored. I spent the morning reviewing everything with Nancy at her kitchen table, the sunlight spilling across the papers. I felt a calm satisfaction as we organized the evidence, labeling it carefully. There was no rush, no flurry, just methodical, deliberate work. Each note and photograph reinforced a truth that Lena had tried to obscure. She could control doors, but she could not control reality, memory, or the law. Later that day, I returned to the street where my house stood, standing at a respectful distance. Through the window, I observed Lena bustling about, arranging things hurriedly. Small mistakes betrayed her confidence. A photo tilted, a stack of mail ignored, a faint scowl as she noticed the evidence of oversight in her own home. I didn't intervene. I didn't signal. I simply watched and catalogued quietly, noting how the threads were slowly unraveling the control she thought she had. Ethan walked out onto the porch, his hands in his pockets. I caught his eye for a brief moment. There was hesitation there, an acknowledgement that perhaps things weren't as simple as they had seemed. I offered a gentle nod, calm but firm, and turned away, leaving him with the quiet weight of presence and truth. That evening, I sat at Nancy's living room, sorting through the collected papers again. The pile felt heavier now, not with burden, but with the quiet strength of validation. It was a slow victory, measured and deliberate. Lena would begin to feel it, I knew, the inevitability of truth asserting itself. She would recognize, even if silently, that her attempts to erase or control had limits she had not anticipated. As I closed my notebook, I felt a wave of quiet triumph. The path forward was unfolding exactly as it should: patience, observation, and quiet precision. The law, the evidence, and the subtle presence I maintained were all converging toward a reckoning that would be calm but undeniable. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a long, slow breath. The locks had been changed, the home invaded, my presence challenged, yet here I was, stronger than ever, steadily reclaiming everything they had tried to take. And I knew, deep in my heart, that the conclusion would come, not with noise or anger, but with the quiet inevitability of truth. The days grew quieter after the evidence was collected, but the tension lingered like a soft hum beneath the surface. Lena moved through the house with her usual brisk efficiency, yet I could sense the subtle shifts, the hesitation in her voice, the tiny pauses when she thought no one was watching. Control had a fragile edge, and she was beginning to feel it without knowing why. I spent my mornings at Nancy's, reviewing papers, sipping tea, and walking the familiar streets around Charleston. Everything seemed peaceful, almost ordinary, but I knew better. This calm was deceptive, the perfect setting for a slow, deliberate resolution. My mind traced the steps ahead, planning the next moves with patience and precision. No dramatic confrontations, no shouting, only quiet, undeniable actions that would speak louder than words. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in muted gold, Ethan came over to Nancy's porch. He didn't knock. He simply appeared, hesitant but determined. "Mom, I've been thinking," he began, his voice low. I listened quietly, letting him search for the words. I need to understand. What's really going on here?" I smiled gently, my heart softening despite the tension. "It's simple, Ethan. Some things can't be taken with a key. Some things belong to the heart and the past, and they need respect." He nodded slowly, the realization settling in. I could see the weight of awareness in his eyes, the understanding that the home, the history, and even the quiet dignity of a mother could not be ignored or erased. Lena had tried, but the truth was quietly asserting itself, piece by deliberate piece. That night, I sat in Nancy's living room, journal open, lamp casting a warm glow over the pages. I wrote down the moments, the observations, the evidence, and the careful plan that had been unfolding. Everything was in place, measured and deliberate. I felt a sense of calm strength, knowing the storm, subtle, poetic, and undeniable, was about to arrive. Sometimes, the quiet moments before action are the most powerful. Lena believed the house, the life, and control itself were hers. But she hadn't accounted for the slow, patient force of truth, patience, and a mother's unwavering presence. I closed my journal and took a deep breath. The calm before the storm was here, and it carried the inevitability of justice wrapped in dignity and quiet power. It happened one morning, just as the sun was beginning to warm the streets of Charleston. I arrived at my house with Tom, Nancy waiting discreetly nearby. There was no fanfare, no shouting, no confrontation, only deliberate, quiet presence. Lena opened the door, her confident posture faltering the instant she saw me. She had sensed the inevitability in the air, though she didn't yet know how complete it would be. "Margaret," she began, but her voice wavered. I didn't answer. I simply walked past her, my steps calm and measured, carrying the quiet weight of truth and determination. Tom followed with the documents, evidence carefully organized, a subtle reminder that the law, patience, and observation had all converged to this point. I moved through the room slowly, deliberately, reclaiming what was mine. Photos, letters, keepsakes, each piece carefully placed into my bag, each one a testament to memory, history, and dignity. Lena's eyes widened as she realized that her attempts at control were unraveling quietly but completely. No shouting, no dramatic gestures, just undeniable reclamation. Ethan stood silently behind her, watching, finally understanding the depth of what had been taken and the quiet strength of the woman before him. He had witnessed the subtle shifts, the deliberate patience, the undeniable power of presence, and now the final revelation became clear. Control is not won through locks or dominance. It is held in truth, memory, and dignity. As I stepped outside, the sun fully illuminating the porch, Lena's voice caught again, quieter this time. "You really meant everything," she said, a mixture of shock and disbelief in her tone. I looked at her calmly, letting the silence carry the message. "Everything that was always mine," I replied softly. No malice, no triumph in my voice, just quiet, undeniable truth. Nancy handed me my bag, and together we walked down the driveway. The weight of history, memory, and quiet justice filled the space. Lena, frozen, could only watch. She had thought she could erase me with locks and arrogance, but she hadn't. Counted on patience, presence, and truth converging slowly, deliberately, and inevitably. As we left, I glanced back once more, letting the finality settle in. The revelation was complete. Quiet, poetic justice had arrived. The house, my memories, and my dignity were restored, not with noise, but with calm, deliberate power. The house felt lighter the next morning, though I wasn't there to see it. I had returned to Nancy's, my bag of reclaimed memories close at hand, the documents safely tucked away. But I could almost feel the change, the shift in the air, the subtle adjustment in the way the house now acknowledged its true history. Lena's attempt to rewrite it had failed, not with a shout, not with confrontation, but with quiet, patient inevitability. I walked slowly along the streets of Charleston that morning, the soft warmth of the sun brushing my face, the distant sounds of life weaving through the neighborhood. Children laughed in their yards, a dog barked somewhere down the street, and the smell of freshly baked bread from the corner bakery reached me. Ordinary, yet comforting. Life had continued outside the storm I had navigated, but inside, justice had quietly taken root. Ethan called that evening. His voice was calm, reflective, and perhaps for the first time filled with understanding. "Mom, I see it now. Everything you said, everything you stood for. It was right. I just didn't realize how much strength it takes." I smiled softly, letting the words linger between us. "Sometimes strength isn't loud, Ethan. It's quiet. It's patience. It's presence. It's dignity, held even when it feels like the world is against you." Nancy and I sat together on her porch afterward, tea in hand, the evening softening around us. I allowed myself to reflect, not with anger, not with regret, but with peace. The locks had been changed, yes, but the truth, the memories, the dignity, and the quiet resilience of a mother could not be altered. They were mine, always, I thought. About Lena, frozen inside the house that morning, realizing the subtle but undeniable power she had underestimated. It wasn't aggression or shouting that restored balance. It was patience, careful observation, and the quiet unfolding of truth. Justice had come wrapped in calm, deliberate hands, poetic and satisfying, yet entirely human. As I closed my eyes that night, I felt a warmth settle in my chest. My home, my memories, my life, restored. Not with noise, not with vengeance, but with quiet triumph. I had reclaimed my agency, my dignity, and my peace. And in that quiet victory, I found clarity, strength, and an enduring sense of calm that nothing could shake. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes silence teaches more than words. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Maybe your voice will be next on Her Voice.